Social Impact CX, the podcast that helps you drive mission and make a difference with customer experience.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining me for episode 33 of Social Impact CX, the podcast. I'm John Corrigan, and I'll be your guide to how you can drive mission and achieve social impact with customer experience work. Thanks for listening. It's always much appreciated. I'm really glad that you're able to take the time and listen in. This episode covers some new territory for Social Impact CX, and I think a lot of practitioners in the field of customer experience. It's the first half of my conversation with a very special guest, customer experience expert Kerry Bodine, who also just happens to be an expert on the subject of service design as well, and that's what we're going to talk about. If you spend the time and effort to really commit to the work of customer experience, there's a really good chance that you will arrive at this very important topic of design. And I think specifically service design, especially if you are working in the nonprofit or social impact sectors. And since many customer experience professionals arrive at this subject of design kind of unexpectedly, I think many times their initial reaction is, so what do I do now with design? I thought Kerry would be a great person to have here on Social Impact CX because she's an expert in both design and customer experience work. Before we get to the conversation with Kerry, let me get to my moment of gratitude, which I always do. I'm grateful for an organization called the Service Design Network, which has an annual conference every fall. The Service Design Network is a great organization. It's nonprofit. It's run by volunteers. And if you find these episodes on service design with Kerry Bodine interesting, I'd really suggest you go online and check out the Service Design Network. I believe the organization was founded in Europe, and it has a lot of European members, but they also have members from around the world, many of whom are right here in North America. As I record this, there's members from Asia as well. And while their annual conference is held most years, I believe, somewhere in Europe, every few years they venture out. I think it was about 5 years ago, they held their conference in New York City, and I was able to attend that one, and it was really worthwhile. It was an interesting experience. In 2019, they'll be returning to North America again to host their annual conference, this time in Toronto. I really do suggest that you check out what they're doing. The Service Design Network is a tremendous source for resources in the field of service design. And their conference I found to be one of those experiences where you could just easily strike up an interesting conversation with other like-minded professionals from literally around the world, because their attendees are from around the world. So check it out. With that, let's get to part one of my service design conversation with Kerry Bodine. Part two will be coming soon, so stay tuned. I hope you enjoy this Social Impact CX discussion about service design. I'm very pleased to welcome Kerry Bodine to Social Impact CX. Kerry is an author, a speaker, a consultant, an advisor, and a widely recognized expert and thought leader in the field of customer experience work. She's appeared in Harvard Business Review and the Wall Street Journal, as well as Forbes and Fast Company. And I think her book, Outside In, is simply one of the most important publications in the world of CX work. If you've not read Outside In, I strongly suggest that you grab a copy. There's great fundamental information about customer experience work in there. I've also had the distinct pleasure of working with Kerry as a client when I was serving as Vice President of Customer Experience at the nonprofit education organization ACT. And Kerry was then with Forrester Research. And while at Forrester, Kerry held the roles of Vice President and Principal Analyst and was the creative force behind the customer experience ecosystem framework, which if you follow Forrester at all, the customer experience ecosystem is a really important concept. Kerry also earned a master's degree from Carnegie Mellon University in the field of human-computer interaction, which I think is a really interesting background to then move into customer experience work. I've known Kerry for several years now, and I'm so very pleased that she's able to take the time to join me here on Social Impact CX to talk about something we are both passionate about, and that's customer experience. So without further delay, let's get to our conversation. And Kerry, I know you have a consulting firm and you travel all over the world as a speaker. Let me stop talking for a minute so that you can say hello and tell us a bit about yourself and your work these days.
Yeah, hello. I'm really happy to be here talking with you, John, and talking with all your listeners. Yeah, thanks for that background. Yeah, I started my own consulting firm about 5.5 years ago, very creatively called Kerry Bodine and Company. Yeah. Yeah, we focus on service design and journey mapping. And as you mentioned, I do a lot of public speaking. I've had the opportunity to speak in some really, really cool places. I think my favorite, the one that got me most excited was speaking at the Louvre a couple years ago. And I've actually got a service design conference that's coming up in Brazil, in Sao Paulo, later this year. So I'll be doing a journey mapping and journey management workshop there.
That is great. And, customer experience work is so global, and even the concepts as customer experience is related to social impact. I know I have a listenership in Europe, specifically in the Netherlands. So I'm sure people will be listening from Europe, but work is happening in Australia and Brazil. I think it's fantastic to see the growth of the sector.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
So, Kerry, here at Social Impact CX, we work on tailoring content of these conversations in a couple ways. First, this podcast is specifically for a couple audiences. It's for people working in a nonprofit organization, and then also people working in businesses that focus on social impact. And it could be a B corporation or some other for-profit company committed to both doing well and doing good at the same time. But that's really the core concept here, is how can people do customer experience work in these environments focused on doing well, doing good, like this double bottom line type concept. And so when you get into nonprofit and social impact work, a couple things tend to change. First, instead of customers, we might be talking about beneficiaries or clients or students or patients or other stakeholders that are probably somehow in need or are part of a cause or a mission of some type. And so the primary motive when our listeners come into the office every day, it may not be profits or even revenue. And to me, that doesn't mean those stakeholders are not customers, but not every organization uses the word customer, and that's an important point. The second factor that changes and is at play many times is that budgets and team resources in these environments that are nonprofit or social impact oriented may not be quite as large as what you find in Fortune 500 type businesses. And I know you have worked with some of the biggest global organizations, businesses out there. So here at Social Impact CX, we also talk about how to be cost effective in approaching customer experience work, and even a bit scrappy, if you will. So, and with that said, CX work is not free usually, but we do talk here about how to make it affordable. So I'd really like to spend the bulk of our time talking about some areas of CX where you have expertise, such as design, and design is certainly closely related to customer experience work. But before we start down that path, I'd love to get any thoughts you might have on doing customer experience work in a lower budget environment that's focused on social good or a nonprofit mission, that doing well and doing good thing.
Well, yeah, and I think that's it's one of the challenges of the term customer experience because it has the word customer in it.
Yeah.
And, even in the for-profit world, customers can mean a lot of different things.
Sure.
If you talk about marketing, you talk about technology, they can be broadly applied to whomever. Yeah, the thing that I would say is you just kind of gotta take a broad view of who your customer is. I'm talking right now with a potential client from the nonprofit world, and they're talking about their supporters and supporters that give them money and other supporters that don't give them money. That they just want to show up to an event or sign a petition or whatever. And in my mind, I think of all of these people as customers, and you've just gotta get past that, I think, and realize that really all of the concepts from the customer experience world can be applied to all of these different types of stakeholders or constituents that you might have or not might need to be engaging in some way. And yeah, sometimes you need to tweak it a little bit. You know, if you're a nonprofit, there are metrics you're going to be looking at that aren't revenue related. Sometimes there are revenue, goals. Certainly, I would say cost savings is one goal that every organization, no matter how big you are, no matter how small you are, no matter what sector you work in, cost savings is one thing that we don't talk about enough in customer experience, and it's just a universal benefit of the methodologies and mindsets that come along with customer experience.
I think those are both fantastic points. I love that you brought up metrics. That's something we've talked about in other episodes of Social Impact CX, and it's so critical, and it does not change just because you're not in a for-profit revenue-driven environment. But the cost savings thing is interesting too, because actually the companies that really decide to compete for and then lead a market with customer experience work, they are focused on cost savings. And there's no reason why, for efficiency and effectiveness reasons, it's good to know. It's good to know about somebody when they're calling in. The better you know, the better you can help people, and that has cost implications too. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, when you're thinking about how to do customer experience in a cost-effective way, I think one of the most important things you need to do when you're starting any kind of customer experience effort within an organization is bring the voice of the customer inside. And voice of the customer is one of these terms that has a specific meaning in the customer experience world. Typically, it's talking about formal survey programs and working with one of the big customer feedback platforms, and then having specific ways of aggregating that data. But what I'm talking about here is just any way that you can help people within your organization understand what your customers are really going through. And I'm a consultant, so certainly I'm not gonna say you shouldn't bring in consultants. But the way that I run my business is that I am really focused on helping organizations learn the tools, learn the skill sets themselves. Yep. Because honestly, I just really think this is the ethical way to do business. I don't believe that any organization should be forever dependent on a consultant. And so I actually really balk against the kind of the traditional consulting approach where the consultants come in and they do some initial intake and then they go away and they do all their work and then they come back and present findings, but essentially the whole thing is a black box, and the organization gets some perhaps answers or insights or direction, but they don't learn how to do anything for themselves. And the thing about customer experience is that you can't outsource a good customer experience. You certainly can't outsource a great or remarkable customer experience. You have to change the way that everyone within the organization is thinking and working on a day-to-day basis. And so if you're going to bring in consultants, my recommendation for you is that you bring in consultants who are going to help you learn new skills and help they'll teach you how to fish. That's really the best way to, I think, make the most for your customer experience investments. Things like customer research, things like, going out, talking with customers, creating journey maps, doing the whole design process. Yes, it can feel foreign and unfamiliar the first time you go through it. And it certainly makes sense to bring in a consultant to help you and guide you. But these skills are not rocket science by any stretch. And so they are things that you and your extended team can learn to do. And so that for me, I think is the best way to make use of a small budget. It may be a bigger initial investment than, you might be looking to make, but it's going to pay off in the long term.
I would agree. And you touched on some great areas there. I did an episode of Social Impact CX. It was not quite a year ago. And I talked about how in a nonprofit environment, voice of the customer can really be voice of the served. And that you can take those same concepts though. And, if you have budget for one of the new platforms that's out there that allows you to do listening and all the analytics that come with that, that's great. If you don't, if you commit to regular surveying and interviewing of customers on even a quarterly basis or whatever, and you commit to the methodology of compiling consistent findings and taking a look at what trends, what do you learn from this at different points in time, what's staying the same, what's changing, that can be just as valuable to your environment. You don't necessarily need a big ticket technology platform to get into the idea of listening. So that comes to the scrappy part of doing customer experience work on a budget. So.
Yeah, I just heard of a tool that's $400 a month for complete surveying capabilities. And sure, yeah, it's not going to have all the bells and whistles of a big technology platform, but if it's that or nothing, it's great. I also know MailChimp has an NPS offering of some sort. I honestly don't know much about it, but there's definitely smaller, more affordable options out there.
Yeah, absolutely. And so one of these big company concepts of building a mature and ongoing voice of customer program, you can take those same concepts and find affordable tools. And then even if you get part of what you need from something like a MailChimp offering or a creative use of SurveyMonkey or whatever, getting started and committing to the practice and committing to listening is more than half the game, I think, at least. So.
I agree. I think committing to listening is a great mantra, and getting your executives committed to listening. Yeah. This has to be something like brushing your teeth. Yeah. It needs to become just part of the hygiene of the company, that this is something that happens on a regular basis.
Yes, exactly. I agree. Okay, so I should tell listeners that Kerry is truly an expert in customer experience work, which you can probably tell just from what we were talking about there. As I prepared for this discussion, it took me a while to narrow down just exactly what we should talk about, because that list is pretty long. So Kerry and her team have put on some great workshops on customer journey mapping. And so maybe while we're talking here, we'll find time to get to journey. I've been lucky enough to participate in fantastic journey mapping workshops with Kerry in the past. But as a CX expert, Kerry also has some great insights into the world of design. And I wanted to talk to her about that, because you can't just talk to anybody about this. Both design thinking and service design. And I thought it might be really interesting to get a CX expert's view specifically on service design. And that's not something that everybody is familiar with. So I thought it'd be interesting to talk with you, Kerry, about this. So if you can help out Social Impact CX listeners with, first, a better understanding about exactly what service design is all about. If you could take it from the top for us, I'd appreciate that. And then, why is service design so relevant to customer experience work?
Absolutely. It's funny. Service design is one of these terms that remains really ambiguous, because it's one of these terms that you kind of want to define with the terms that are already there. It is the design of services, which I know is a ridiculous way to create a definition. But the way I define service design is, it is the definition, so not the design, but the definition of ideal journeys and the organizations that are required to support them. And so
that is a true CX professional's definition of service design. I like that.
Great. Yeah, it took me a while to really distill to distill what I understood about service design and come up with that definition. And my design background, goes back to the mid 90s. I was designing websites back kind of at the advent of the web as we know it. And then, as you mentioned, I was at Carnegie Mellon, and I was designing speech interfaces and interfaces for robots and wearable technology. Yep. And when I first started hearing about service design, and it was while I was at Carnegie Mellon back in the early noughts, I was kind of like, well, why is this different? How is this different from everything else that I've learned and practiced about design over my career up until that point? And for me, I think what the key difference is that second part of the definition. It's the organizations that are required to deliver the experience. So you're defining the entire journey, which goes beyond honestly what I had been doing. It was like, okay, yeah, here's a speech interface for one particular type of interaction, or here's a website to do one particular task. But it is the true journey. It's okay, what is the trigger that is starting someone to have a need for something in the first place? Whether they decide they want to do a donation, make a donation, or they decide they want to participate in some fundraising marathon or whatever it is. What's the need? How do they find out about it? How do they get information, sign up? What happens to them? Kind of the I'm using air quotes here, onboarding process. That happens. What's the actual event look like? What happens afterwards? It's that whole journey. So it's not related to just one point in time. But what all of my previous design experience had missed prior to coming into the service design community was, guess what? There are so many different technologies and processes and roles within an organization, potentially within multiple organizations, sometimes, volunteers, partners who need to be involved, and you have to design all of that to work together as well. Yeah. So it's not just saying, hey, I'm going to design this, website or this, tennis shoe or whatever it is. You've got to design truly an entire ecosystem. And that to me is really what the heart of service design is all about.
So you talked about the basics, which is great because not everybody understands what service design is, but specifically, how are customer experience then and service design related?
That's a great question, John. And again, that is something that I really struggled with when I was really getting into the service design world and figuring that all out. In my mind, there really is a strong overlap. If you think of the Venn diagram between customer experience and service design, there is a lot of overlap in it. It might be helpful actually to talk about the ways that they're not related. And I would say, there's a lot that goes into customer experience management, the metrics piece that we talked about, kind of the ongoing voice of the customer surveying work. There are pieces of the whole suite of customer experience design methodologies or disciplines that the service design world just really doesn't get into very much. That's actually something that I'm helping the service design community with right now, is trying to understand that there needs to be more ongoing management related to service design, because okay, you can put an entire ecosystem into place on day one, just like you could launch a website on day one, but then you need to change some content here, or someone leaves, or there's a reorganization, or whatever it is. And so the organization changes over time, and in order to have whatever journey, whatever service you've designed, stay in the state that you designed it to be in, you've got to manage that entire ecosystem. And so anyway, there needs to be more of the customer experience management that bleeds over into service design, but in the state of service design as it is right now, that typically isn't there. So I would say that that's one difference. The other thing is, on the service design world, there is a lot of work done in the service design community that specifically focuses on John, what we're here talking about today, focusing on citizen experience, focusing on kind of, I would say, service design for good.
I think there's a real focus there, especially with the people listening to Social Impact CX.
Absolutely. I would say if you're interested in service design and you're enjoying what we're already talking about, I would encourage you to take a look at the service design community. There's actually a service design conference, global conference every year. There's a service design network. The conference this year is coming up in the fall in Toronto. So for North American listeners, it'd be easy to get to relatively. So there is this really strong focus in the service design community of using the tools, using the methodologies and the mindsets of service design for social good.
Thank you for tying that together, because I strongly agree. That's one of the reasons why I thought we should talk about service design.
So before we move on, though, then there is that piece where they do overlap, where customer experience and service design are truly related. And that is in the design of, or let me say, in the definition of those journeys and the underlying ecosystems, because, the magical customer experiences don't just, appear out of nowhere. They do have to be designed. And so the methodologies of service design, I would say, are really identical to what, if you're working in a customer experience role, what you need in order to design a great experience for your customers, for your constituents, for your stakeholders, who are your volunteers, whoever they are. And so, when we're looking at, through the lens of service design at designing, or again, defining these journeys, that's exactly what the customer experience folks are trying to do. And the journey has really become, and I believe is going to become, an even greater focus of the work in the customer experience world. There is a lot of really great research out there, research from McKinsey, if you want to hunt this down online, that really shows that the journey is the unit that you need to be paying attention to and designing for and measuring. It's not all these individual touch points. Yes, you need to look at them, you need to measure them, you need to optimize them, but ultimately what we need to be looking at is the journey, because the journey represents the goal that someone is trying to do. I'm trying to compete in this marathon to raise money for, XYZ cause, or I'm trying to, whatever it is. And so if we're not looking at the journeys, we're not looking at how well we're helping people complete the things that they're trying to do that support our organization's goals. And so, the journey, I think, is really what unites customer experience design and service design. And, you've got to, of course, define what that is, and then define how you're going to support it. So that's where the overlap really does come from.
I would agree. I would agree. And then also the things you can learn from mapping a journey about good things and bad things that are happening during a journey. I think it has to be able to inform then what you try to do from a design perspective. This has been Social Impact CX Podcast, episode 33, which has been the first half of my conversation with customer experience expert and service design expert, Kerry Bodine. And we've been talking about service design. You can find Kerry online at kerrybodine.com. That's KERRYBODINE.com. Her Twitter handle is also Kerry Bodine. And if you're interested, Kerry is the author of a fantastic book called Outside In. Do you have thoughts or something to ask about after listening to episode 33 of Social Impact CX with Kerry? As always, you can ask a question or make a comment here at Social Impact CX a couple different ways. First, you can send an email to comment@socialimpactcx.com. That's COMMENT at socialimpactcx.com. You can also find us on Twitter and post a question there. Our Twitter handle is @socialimpactcx. And please follow us on Twitter to stay up to date with new podcasts and other related content, all the latest and greatest. You can also find me on Twitter at the handle John F. Corrigan. We've expanded where you can find Social Impact CX, so hopefully you're listening wherever you find your podcasts, someplace like Spotify or Apple Podcasts or Google Play. If you're listening to this someplace where you can post a comment, please do, and we'll do our best to keep up with your questions and to respond wherever it is you're posting. This is John Corrigan reminding you that, especially in social impact work, it's important to understand that your mission is really all about someone else's journey. And the more you know about someone's journey, the more you can help. Thanks for listening to Social Impact CX.